Snow drifted across Frosthallow like pale, wandering spirits, each flake carrying a memory of some forgotten winter. Officer Rowan Hale stood at the edge of the town's abandoned rail yard with Bramble at his side, the dog's breath rising in soft, ghost-like curls. The morning was so quiet it felt as though the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for whatever truth the wind had been trying to whisper for days. Rowan had lived through 37 winters, but this one felt heavier, like an old debt finally come due. The cold bit through his gloves as he adjusted the strap of his lantern. Though he knew the chill had little to do with weather, it had been 3 days since Silas disappeared into the woods. 3 days since Rowan's hope had begun to retreat into the dark corners of his chest, trembling like a half-starved animal. In Frosthallow, everything became rumor within minutes, and Rowan had heard them all: murmurs of irresponsibility, incompetence, curses on the Hale name. People never forgot that he and Silas were brothers separated once before. In childhood, by a storm and a mistake Rowan never forgave himself for. They whispered now that history had a habit of repeating. The dog beside him shifted, ears twitching. Bramble had served for 9 years, long enough to become more legend than animal half-loaf in silhouette, steady in heart. His instincts sharper than most men's, but even he had seemed troubled lately, pacing the station, whining at the northern windows as though the shadows outside were calling him by name. Rowan crouched and pressed a hand gently to the side of Bramble's neck. "You'll tell me when you understand it," he said. The dog blinked slowly, almost solemnly, as if acknowledging a burden they shared, as Rowan rose again, boots cracking through a thin crust of ice. He noticed a small figure sitting on the station steps, so still she looked carved from winter itself. A girl bundled poorly in a fraying gray shawl, her feet tucked beneath her like she was trying to disappear into the wood. Her hair fell in pale strands across her face, catching the weak morning light. Bramble's attention snapped to her immediately. She stood when they approached, though her shoulders curled inward as if to shield a secret. Rowan recognized her. Marin Lark, the quiet girl who lived near the outskirts with her aging aunt. Children in town whispered about her the same way they did about Bramble, sometimes fearfully, sometimes in awe. She was too observant, too silent, too familiar with the company of stray animals. The grown-ups had other words for her. Strange, sensitive, touched, words that left bruises. Even if they never touched skin, Marin brushed a tear from her cheek before Rowan could pretend not to notice. "Officer Hale," she said softly, her breath catching like bird wings against winter air. I waited here because I needed to tell you something." But no one inside would listen. He kept his voice low, careful. "What is it, Marin?" Her hands twisted together, small and red from cold. Bramble stepped forward and placed his head gently against her knee, as if anchoring her to steady ground. She inhaled shakily. "Bramble knows where your brother is." The words were simple, yet they struck Rowan like a sudden crack in an old dam. He needed to believe them. But he'd learned the hard way that hope, when clutched too quickly, had a habit of cutting the hands that reached for it. "How could you know that?" he asked. Marin lowered her gaze. "I feel things. When animals are scared, or when they remember things that hurt. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's soft. But Bramble's been calling for days." She swallowed, fighting the tremor in her voice. "He's been seeing your brother in the dark, not with his eyes, with his heart." The station door swung open with a cold clang, and Sheriff Elias Wren stepped out, his broad frame blocking half the doorway. He regarded Marin with the same look he reserved for broken tools, irritated that they existed and annoyed he had to deal with them. "Officer Hale, are you wasting time again? Half the town's out searching. You're needed in the South Ravine, not entertaining children. Especially this one." Marin flinched so visibly Rowan's jaw tightened. Frosthallow was small, and its judgments were sharp. Everyone pretended to protect children until they showed a glimmer of difference, then the kindness thinned like ice under too much weight. Rowan stepped between them in a quiet, deliberate motion. "She's not wasting time," he said. His breath fogged between them like a faint barrier. "She came to tell me something important." Wren scoffed. "Dreams and nonsense." We need facts, not fantasies. But Rowan had already made his decision. Not out of desperation, though he had plenty of that, but from the way Bramble pressed closer to Marin, as if she were the anchor to a truth he'd been trying to convey all along. He turned back to the girl, softening his tone. "Show me." Marin's eyes lifted to his, and for a heartbeat, he saw something ancient, their loneliness wrapped in courage. Determination threaded through fear. She nodded once. Rowan removed the scarf from around his own neck and draped it around her shoulders. The wool too big for her, but warm. She touched it lightly, as if she wasn't used to being given things without condition. Bramble remained close, guiding her down the steps. The two of them moving with a strange synchronicity, almost like they were sharing the same pulse. They walked past the sheriff, whose disapproval radiated like a second winter wind, but Rowan felt oddly steady. For the first time in days, he felt something expanding within him, not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. Frost Hollow's streets were lined with thin columns of smoke rising from chimneys. The soft glow of lantern light stretching across windows frosted with fern-like patterns. People paused to stare Rowan with a child at his side, the dog leading as if on a mission. Whispers carried behind them in low, curling threads. Marin Lark again. That Hale boy's losing his mind. Following a child? And that wolf dog. No wonder Silas ran off. Rowan kept walking. He'd learned long ago that gossip was simply the sound of small hearts rattling in big, empty rooms. But he felt each comment scrape across old wounds. Marin led them toward the northern path, her steps slow but certain. She placed a hand on Bramble's head now and then, grounding herself in his warmth. "I hear him sometimes," she murmured. "Not with words. Just feelings. The cold scares him, and he keeps remembering falling." Rowan's heart lurched painfully. "Is he hurt?" "I don't know," she whispered, "but Bramble does." The dog stopped suddenly at the edge of the woods. His body stiffened, tail straight, nose lifted to the wind. Rowan felt the shift in him like a shiver down his spine. Bramble took 2 steps forward, paused, then barked once, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the trees. Something in that bark carried urgency, almost like pleading. Rowan lifted his lantern, its warm glow spilling over a narrow trail winding into thick pines. He recognized the path not from recent searches, but from memory. He and Silas used to wander there as boys before the accident stole their closeness. Rowan could still see the ridge where Silas fell, could still hear the brittle crack of branches beneath his own feet as he tried to reach him in time. Even now, the memory felt like winter hands gripping his throat. Moran touched Rowan's sleeve gently. "He didn't leave because of you," she said, her voice nearly swallowed by the cold. "He was calling for you. I think that's why Bramble remembers it so clearly." Rowan closed his eyes briefly. Her words were too soft, too honest to dismiss. When he opened them, the girl was watching him with a quiet bravery that felt older than her years. "Stay close," he said. "Both of you." They stepped onto the trail. Snow cushioned their footsteps in muted crunches, each step sinking slightly as though the forest were pulling them deeper into its secrets. The air smelled like pine resin and distant water. Marin whispered softly to Bramble little sounds, almost musical, that steadied the dog's pace. Time slowed as they walked. The world beyond the trees faded until there was only Rowan's breath, Bramble's steady movement, and the fragile trust that threaded between all three. Lantern light cast golden arcs across branches heavy with snow. Rowan's mind drifted to Silas's face, the stubborn tilt of his chin, the warmth in his laughter. The last look they shared before the woods swallowed him again. Just as Rowan felt doubt clawing up his spine, Bramble veered sharply to the right, nose pressed to the ground. His tail stiffened. A low, urgent whine escaped him. Rowan hurried forward and saw something caught beneath a tangle of frozen brush, a scrap of dark fabric snagged on a thorn. He knelt, pulled it free with gloved fingers, and recognized it instantly. Silas's coat, the same one Rowan had mended the sleeve of 2 weeks before. His breath stuttered. The forest felt suddenly too quiet, as if listening. Marin knelt beside him, her mittened hand brushing the fabric gently. She closed her eyes. "He was here," she whispered. "He was scared. And cold." Before Rowan could speak, her knees buckled. He caught her just as she sagged forward, her body small and frighteningly light in his arms. Bramble barked sharply, circling them, then turned toward the deeper woods and barked again, louder this time. Urgent, insistent. Rowan gathered Maren close and rose to his feet. Her pulse fluttered rapidly beneath her skin, exhaustion pulling her under. The forest ahead loomed darker, thicker, but Bramble's posture left no room for hesitation. Rowan tightened his grip on the lantern. "All right, boy," he murmured. "Lead us." The dog darted ahead, just far enough to guide, but not to vanish from sight. Rowan followed Maren in his arms. The girl's breath soft against his shoulder. He didn't know what awaited them deeper in the woods. But for the first time since Silas disappeared, Rowan felt the faint, trembling bloom of direction, a fragile thread pulling them forward through the winter dark. And he followed it. The wind stiffened as Rowan pushed deeper into the forest. Bramble's silhouette weaving ahead like a living flame drawn forward by instinct alone. Maren stirred weakly in his arms, her eyelids fluttering as if caught between worlds. He shifted her closer, feeling how fragile she was, like winter had carved her from frost instead of bone. Yet her presence steadied him. Even unconscious, she felt like the one thing reminding him why he couldn't falter. Lantern light flickered across the snow, throwing fleeting shadows that slipped between branches like half-forgotten memories. The trail narrowed, forcing Rowan to angle his body and protect Maren from low limbs coated in brittle frost. Bramble paused now and then, glancing back with soft whines, urging them silently forward. Each sound carried meaning, and Rowan found himself understanding the dog more clearly than he ever had. Fear, urgency, loyalty, they were all there, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath Bramble's ribs. A distant sound cracked through the stillness. Rowan stopped, breath held, listening. It came again, a sharp, splintered echo like ice breaking or wood shifting under weight. Bramble's ears shot up. He barked once, then bounded forward with sudden certainty. Rowan's pulse thudded painfully as he followed. Lantern light bouncing wildly over the path, the forest dropped abruptly into a steep ravine, the ground sloping so sharply that Rowan had to dig his heels into the snow to keep balance. Bramble stood at the edge, tail stiff, head lowered. He let out a low, tremoring whine that rippled through the cold air like grief-made sound. Rowan stepped beside him, lantern held high below. Half buried in snow and shadow lay Silas. The sight stole Rowan's breath so completely that for a moment he forgot about the cold, about the forest, about everything except the shape of the brother he'd been chasing in memory and regret for years. Silas lay wedged between two fallen branches, one pinning his leg at an awkward angle. His face was pale, marked with fading frost, but his chest moved, a faint, desperate rise and fall that made Rowan's knees nearly give. "Silas," he whispered, the name escaping like a prayer that had waited too long at the sound. Silas's eyes fluttered open. Confusion flickered first, then recognition, then something Rowan had feared he'd never see again, trust. Rowan. The word was strained, cracked by cold and exhaustion. "You." Came Rowan exhaled shakily, lowering Maren gently onto a patch of soft snow before beginning his descent. Every step down felt like walking through the memory of the last time he'd failed Silas years ago, as boys, when Silas had fallen and Rowan hadn't reached him fast enough. But this time he would. He had to. The slope was slick. But Rowan gripped the roots and frozen earth with a steadiness anchored in something deeper than strength. When he reached Silas, he knelt beside him, lantern light washing over his brother's face. "I'm here," Rowan said softly, brushing snow from Silas's cheek. "I should have been sooner." Silas's breath hitched. I tried to find you. That night. I wasn't running away." His voice wavered. "I slipped." Rowan closed his eyes, grief and relief merging into a single, overwhelming ache. "I know. I should have known all along." Bramble scrambled down the slope with surprising grace for his size. pushing his muzzle against Silas's chest as though urging him to stay awake. Marin, still weak, had managed to sit up, her small hands gripping the edge of a branch as she watched. Her eyes were heavy but alert. Sensing the fragile moment unfolding, Rowan examined Silas's leg. It was badly bruised, but not broken. The branch trapping him was heavy and frozen into the ground. Rowan set the lantern aside and braced his hands beneath it, muscles trembling as he forced his weight upward. Snow slid off in sheets. The wood groaned. Silas let out a painful grunt, but Rowan didn't stop. He pushed harder, drawing strength from every silent promise he'd ever made to himself. Slowly, the branch lifted. Silas dragged his leg free as Rowan shoved the wood aside. The moment the pressure eased, Silas sagged forward, and Rowan caught him, pulling him into a tight embrace. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The forest felt suddenly warmer, as though the trees themselves were exhaling. "I thought I lost you again," Rowan whispered. "You didn't," Silas murmured. "You never did." Marin's soft voice drifted down from above. "Bramble showed us what you were feeling." Silas blinked, confused. Rowan looked up to see her grasping the trunk of a nearby sapling for support. Bramble stayed near her, brushing against her side protectively. Her cheeks were flushed with cold, but she stood firm. A small figure carved from courage, Rowan guided Silas carefully up the slope, bracing him with one arm and steadying Marin with the other. It was a slow, breathless climb, each movement deliberate. When they reached level ground, Silas swayed, but Rowan held him upright. Lantern light pulsed against the trees like a heart beating in the dark. The distant crunch of boots sounded behind them. Rowan tensed instinctively, but when he turned, he saw Sheriff Wren emerging through the pines, followed by a handful of townspeople carrying ropes and lanterns. The sheriff's eyes widened at the sight of Silas, alive but battered. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Wren approached with an expression Rowan had never seen on him, one of grudging awe. "You did it," Wren said quietly, looking not at Rowan but at Marin, then at Bramble. "The dog. And the girl?" Rowan nodded. "They showed the way." The sheriff exhaled a slow breath, the frost drifting from his lips like smoke. "Well," he said almost gently, "seems I owe both of them an apology." Marin lowered her eyes, unused to kindness. Bramble nudged her hand, tail flicking in a soft wag. The townspeople formed a loose circle, murmuring relief instead of judgment now. Even their whispers felt different, less sharp, more humbled. Rowan wrapped his arm around Silas as volunteers handed over blankets. Unia appeared at the back of the group, pushing her way forward with tears shining in her eyes. She didn't embrace Rowan. Instead, she reached out with trembling hands and brushed the snow from his shoulders, one gentle sweep at a time. The gesture was small, yet it settled something deep in him. Something tired, something long frozen. Silas leaned lightly against Rowan. "I'm cold," he whispered, with a weak half-smile. "You will be warm soon," Rowan promised. "We're taking you home." As the group began moving back through the forest, Marin stumbled slightly. Rowan caught her hand, steadying her. Her fingers were icy, but she squeezed his faintly. "Bramble didn't find your brother," she said softly. "Your heart did. Bramble just remembered the way." Her words settled quietly into Rowan's chest, a truth both tender and heavy. Behind them, the ravine faded into darkness, but its cold shadows no longer felt like enemies. The path ahead glowed with a mosaic of lanterns, each step brightened by the warmth of many breaths, many hopes. Rowan glanced back once, sat the forest that had taken so much from him, yet returned something infinitely more precious. He felt the weight of the night lifting, replaced by a fragile, rising clarity. Winter had taken Silas, but winter had also given him back. The group pressed onward, the wind gentler now, as if the forest itself approved of the reunion it had witnessed, and though the night remained cold, Rowan walked with a warmth he hadn't felt in years, carrying not just his brother's weight, but a renewed understanding of loyalty, grace, and the quiet, steadfast bonds that hold people to one another long after words fail. If the reader listened closely, they could almost hear it, the soft whisper of winter, carrying a lesson through the pines, that even in the coldest season, even in the darkest ravine, a heart willing to search is a heart capable of finding its way home.